Okay, so we set up 5 cell builders. We got 5 of them spread around here throughout the apiary that we're using to raise the queens. At least this apiary we're using to raise queens. The whole backbone to breeding, and not just propagating queens, but breeding, is selecting breeders. And obviously there's a huge amount of time and energy that goes into just propagating queen bees to breed from, at least on my behalf. So right now we have 4 breeder queens that I have. I got a few more, I probably got 3 more that I have to bring back to get staged. But what I do when I find breeder queens, I bring them back to this apiary where I raise the queen cells, but I keep the breeder queens confined to a single deep. What I'm about to show you is nothing new in a sense, but I keep her confined onto 3 combs, and every 8 days I rotate an empty, nice black drawn comb onto her side of the excluder, so she's confined to 3 combs, so she gets right to work laying on the comb that we give her. So essentially what you want to do is introduce this comb to the queen 4 days before you graft, so that the day you graft, you pull out the frame. If all goes well, it's got larvae right there at the right age looking at you, and you don't have to go hunting around on a frame of a particular colony you're trying to propagate, the genetics from. You can just find your larvae to graft from all right here in front of you, and you can just make it easy to graft. You can really get it done in short order. So this particular queen is she's more of like a Carniolan lineage. I think she's 3 years old. I think she's got a blue dot on her, but here's the system, right? It's nothing complicated or new. A lot of beekeepers use this, or at least I know a handful that do, and it works well for me, so I keep doing it. The trick here to setting up these breeder colonies for your breeder queens, use 1 frame of brood, a frame of honey, and just like an empty drawn comb, and then what you want to do is shake literally 4 frames, 5 frames of nurse bees into this box. You don't need the brood really. You just need 1 frame of brood to stable, to provide some sort of kind of slow growth mechanism for the colony. If you start these with too much brood, if you give them 2 or 3 frames of brood, by the time they start building up a field force, which is in short order in a few weeks, and with a nice honey flow, they just plug everything with honey. So the day you go and give them the frame, the day you go and give the empty comb for the queen to lay and for you to graft from, you pull it out on the grafting day and it's just full of nectar, because the field bees have become so strong, the population of field bees has gotten so big, they just plug everything up with nectar. So what I do to get a good, long, extended use of being able to keep the field force to a minimal is by, again, using 1 frame of brood to start them, the breeder queen on that frame typically, and then 4 or 5 frames of nurse bees shaken into this just to keep the population so that they can cover the frames or the queen can get to laying. So essentially I can get maybe 4 rounds of grafting without this getting too plugged up, because nothing's worse than having to come on the day you're grafting and everything in this scenario. If you have to go hunting for larvae, it's more things to consider, more time to take up in the day. So it's nice if you can get this to work. You put the frames in, pull them out on the day you graft. You pull out the frame you put in 4 days ago. Larvae all at the right age looking at you, floating in jelly. That's the thing. A lot of people ask if I prime my cups with jelly. You don't need to with this system if you do it right. Again, if you shake all these nurse bees into this scenario with a frame of brood and the queen, there's so many nurse bees, and the ratio of nurse bees to open brood is there's less open brood to nurse bees, so any open brood is just getting pampered by these nurses, and so your larvae when you graft are just floating in jelly. And when you graft with a Chinese grafting tool or some sort of a grafting tool that you can scoop, you literally scoop the jelly with the larva, and it makes placement of the larva in the cups really easy too. Let's see if we can find her, just to kind of give you guys an idea. So my breeder queens, this is a good point to talk about my breeding program. My breeder queens are all coming from colonies that have no treatment. I personally am a staunch believer that if you want to breed for resistance, you need to withhold treatment. And you need to do that in a way that keeps your operation going, but at the same time, the only mechanism that really tests for resistance is nature and mites and bees working it out. But you can't allow, obviously for the sake of a business, you can't have a system where the mites are constantly overwhelming your apiary and you're losing everything every year. It's just not sustainable for the beekeeper, and it's not sustainable for the bees. You want to be able to apply enough pressure from bees and mites, or mites to bees, where you apply enough pressure that's not going to kill the host. And you're not going to kill the beekeeper if you're trying to do this for any sort of vocation. my breeder queens are just that. This queen is 3 years old, but all the breeders that I graft from have to be at least 2 years old, and they go through the gambit of 2 winters. First winter is spent in a nucleus colony. Second winter, she's admitted to production status to produce a crop of honey, and she's left untreated in both scenarios, both the nucleus colony and the honey production colony. So in her second season, without any treatment, then I, obviously will further do the VSH, the Harbo assay, to find the level of VSH expression. Once I kind of get those numbers correlated, with VSH, or again, just having 2 years with no treatment and doing very well, it's pretty easy to deduce that there's something going on in these colonies or with this particular queen. So she's right here. She's a blue dot, so she's a 3-year-old queen. The colony she came from was just gung-ho. She's a very strong colony. It was actually a potential breeder last year for me, but I had too many breeders and I didn't get around to her, so I'm finally getting around to breeding from her this year. And there's actually some larvae right here that I can graft from. It's hard to see on the camera, but I'll show you guys later when we're ready to graft. We'll show you guys what it looks like. We'll put her back in. It's funny, as I was putting the frame down, the queen literally jumped from the frame I was putting back into the box onto this next frame. I've very rarely seen that, but it was kind of nerve-wracking at the same time. You know what I'm going to do, just to make it so that I don't see her do that again? I'm just going to actually relocate her. I'm a big fan of picking queens up by their wings. I don't really like to hold them by their legs, so wings are more forgiving than legs are. Just looking to see again what we have here for larvae. Yeah, there's a couple in there. Enough to do what we're going to do today. So, there. She's there. Very gently slide these over and button her up. This is another breeder. Again, just checking to see what we have for larvae to graft from. There's a hodgepodge of stuff in here. This isn't the frame I had given her, but she was clearly here on the day I needed her to be for grafting purposes. There's a mixed stage of larvae here. There's some that are a little old, there's some that are just right. The longer you graft, the more you commit yourself to raising queen bees, the better your eye is to, to find a larvae to graft from. So you don't have to kind of second guess yourself. But queen rearing is kind of like most things with beekeeping. You just gotta, if you're interested in doing this, you just start in wherever you're at, and you learn from your mistakes, and you improve upon your skill set. And I would always tell people, don't be afraid of failure. I see so many people getting frustrated with queen rearing that they kind of give up, and that's fine. But I always kind of tell people, just keep pushing on, keep learning. You can only get better if you commit yourself to, and if you can be patient with yourself to perfect your skill set, especially if you're going to graft. You don't need to graft. You can use the Nicot system, I guess, if you want to confine the queen in the little Nicot cage and transfer the cups with the larvae to the frame that you're going to let the cell builder raise the cells out of. But anyways, like I mentioned earlier, there's so many ways to raise queens, or to propagate queens. This is an empty frame. I don't know, or even, I didn't see her, but that doesn't mean much. Anyways, this little, showing you guys what this one looks like. I don't know where she went. There she is, right there. Unmarked. What I'll do is actually just identify this frame. And we'll look at, I got one more breeder over here that we can take a look at. This particular breeder is one of my favorite lines of queens that I've got. This is a family that always does exceptionally well with honey production, with winter ability, with just tolerance and resistance to mites. It's just nice to have a few things genetically in your pocket, so to speak, that pull the weight of the apiary. They kind of got the backbone. She's a 2-year-old queen. She's right here. She's got clipped wings. I remember actually she was one that was getting a little swarmy a few years ago, and I just didn't want to lose her. So I actually ended up clipping her wings, and I very rarely clip queens' wings. For some reason I just didn't, I just said you're not going anywhere. So I clipped her wings the day that I made that decision, and she's still with us. She's there. Here's the frame. Did she lay anything up? Yeah, there's some larvae in there. So we'll graft from that one. What's this look like? That's way too old. It's about ready to cap. But again, there's some larvae in there too that I could, there's plenty to go around here. All right, so essentially now that we've got the cell builder set up, I wait an hour or so, go eat some lunch. Give yourself some time to let those cell builders get good and desperate. And then when we come back, pull the larvae to graft, we can see what these cell builders look like and kind of give you the visual observation of what queenless colonies look like and kind of the signs that I like to see to really show me that the colonies are ready to receive a graft. Okay, I'd like to show you guys the schedule for grafting or for queen rearing. And the brilliance behind this whole system is kind of in this schedule, so to speak. So what this allows me to do is I'll articulate this in some detail here in a moment, but what this allows me to do is to do several things, well, 2 things that I can think of off the top of my head. One is that I have the ability to have a legitimate breeding program where throughout this growing season here, the summer, spring, summer, I can propagate a large number of queens simultaneously producing honey. So I'd like to show you guys the schedule that I have for queen rearing, that I have for raising queens. The nice thing about this schedule is it helps me to be diversified in my apiary, where I'm not just committed towards raising queens and I can't do anything else. The nice thing about it is I can raise the queens myself, and I can still be involved in managing my other parts of my apiary, predominantly honey production. And at the same time, with raising all these queens, I actually can also run a nuke program where I can propagate the nukes, put the queens in the nukes, manage nukes. So you have this 3-tiered apiary around honey production or queen breeding and rearing, and honey production and nuke production. And this schedule is the mastermind, or the whole thing that makes this work. I'll explain how it goes, but just bear with me. So it's 8-day schedule. Essentially, the 8-day schedule is kind of working on the basic biology of the pupation from egg to adult virgin queen, essentially, or an egg from a virgin queen. You're on a 16-day cycle, so if you cut that in half, you're left with eight days. But anyways, to explain this, so day 1, for the sake of explaining it to you guys, is what I would call setup day. That's the day you're going to set up your cell builders. Day 2, we prepare the cell builders. This is an optional thing. What I've done actually is combine day 2 and day 3 together. So if you have inclement weather, then take advantage of day 2, or this preparing the cell builders. If you got a really crummy day on grafting day, take advantage of setting them up or preparing them so that on the rainy day you graft, you have less time to fuss in the bees and everything's waiting for you. All you have to do is graft, insert the larvae, and you're good to go. But so again, prepare is an optional thing. I usually tie day 2 and 3 together, so what it does is give me day 2 to be elsewhere in the apiary for management elsewhere. Graft is pretty straightforward. That's what we shot videos of today. And day 4 is catch queens. So after you graft, as you have these batches of queens work through the system, eventually you're going to have to harvest queens out of mating nukes. So the day after you graft, you harvest the queens. And then again, with multiple batches of cells being raised on the schedule, behind the queen cell or behind catching queens, you have another round of cells to replace the caught queens. And then you have a day off. The nice thing is you get 2 days off, technically almost 3 days off in this work week. So on this day, typically with queens, I like to make up nukes. So I have a day to make up nukes. And and get the new queen situated. And day 7 is the day in the morning. It's just a morning activity. Really, just takes a few moments to work the breeders, and that's essentially where I'm moving empty empty drawn comb into the breeder colonies for the queens to lay. And if you just did the schedule real quick, you just 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have 4 days, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 to graft. So that's the conveniently you work breeders, put the frames in the breeder colonies on day 7. For grafting day 3, but regardless, day 8 is a day off where I can go out again. That's a day I usually am running around putting supers on, or after I work the breeders in the morning, I go around other parts of the apiary here. So again, the beautiful thing about this is it's multifaceted. It gives me the ability to be in different parts of the apiary with managing other things besides just getting caught up in the busyness of queen rearing. What this looks like on a schedule is pretty simple. My schedule, if you're just to look here, here's the month of May. I don't think I have any pertinent information. Not too much. For example, you have prepare, this is my first cell builder. I set up on, where was it? Set up on the 9th, right? So one thing I noticed here, on day 1, you set your colonies up 10 days before you graft. That's what I'd mentioned before when we're preparing the colonies for the cell builders. 10 days before you graft, it's called setting up. So on the first step is setup. Then you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? 9 to 19. So you graft on the 19th. And then what happens then is what happens is before you graft, if you're going to do multiple batches, you just set up your first you pick a day you want to graft, and you count that back 10 days. That's the day you set up. And then if you wanted to run multiple batches, you can run the second batch. It works tandem 8 days, so it's on this 8-day cycle. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Start the second round of queens. Set up number 2. Again, another 8 days. Set up number 3. Following another 8 days. Set up where's number 4? And another 8 days. Set up number 5. So I try to graft 8 rounds of queens, and then everything kind of falls into order after that. So you have 8 days from setup. And then you go from obviously 10 days to graft. So before you graft, you prep cell builder 1. So then the schedule starts filling up, essentially, to get right into the thick of the summer. What happens is let me pick a week here where it's all laid out. Where's the setup? So I'm setting up, this is the middle of June, end of June. So on June 18th, I'm setting up cell builder, the round group number 6. I'm preparing to graft group number 5. And on the 20th, I'm grafting into number 5. On the 21st, I catch the second round of queens. And on the 22nd, the cells that are coming out of the 4th round of grafts are replacing that graft. And I get a day off, work breeders for number 6, yada yada, set up number 7. And it goes on until you're done raising queens. And slowly things ramp up to this nice, intense kind of schedule. And then slowly things wean itself back off into normalcy as you're done raising queens. Hopefully this makes sense. If you guys have questions about this, you can reach out, I guess, on the comments, and I'll try to do my best to get back with you. But this is really, again, what makes this whole thing work for me, is that I can be elsewhere in my apiary managing other things besides really focusing too much on queen rearing, which is already taxing enough when your schedule has to be locked in. So hope this is helpful. Nurse bees stick to the frames like Velcro, so it's like all the older bees will fall right off the frames without any tussle, and the young nurse bees, they just say, nope, we're sticking to it. So bee brushes, or a brush, does come in handy when you're trying to get bees off of combs. So obviously in my case, I like to identify the frames for the breeder, so I make a note on the top bar so that I know when I'm grafting what I'm transferring for larva is from what queen. It's amazing at how many larvae are in a frame. You start looking at this just to the eye, it's like there's not going to be enough larvae to graft. And then you start grafting and it's like, wow, there's just in a small space of comb, there's a lot of real estate in a sense for larvae, so you don't need much. And in my case, I'm only grafting 250, 240. I think 240 is my I think it's a little over that. It's like 240 cells we're grafting, so it's not like I need a huge amount of larvae, but obviously for people that aren't grafting that much, it sounds like a lot. But let's see, which one did I mark here? This one, this queen didn't really lay up in the frames that I needed her to, or on the frame I needed her to, so I'm going to have to hunt around on this one a little bit more. Let's see. The weather today is phenomenal. Nice thing about doing this type of work is you get to be out in it while it's nice, and you get to be out in it while it's not so nice. Because regardless of the weather, in agriculture and bees in general, you have to get the job done if you want to be successful at anything in this line of work. All right, so we'll take this frame. I like to just get a visual on her before I start shaking the frames. I should mark her so that I know that this queen is in fact easy to spot, and then helps me when I want to shake the frames just to identify her. Where'd you go? She's probably on the frame I set aside here. Not a lot of bees, she can't hide too far. Sometimes what happens is you start looking for queens and they're laying an egg, so her abdomen's down in the cell. So most of her's covered. And you come back and she pops up out of the cell, and there she is on the frame you overlooked. I'm not seeing her though. What I'll do is just shake a frame that I need for the sake of time. There she is, laying an egg. Move her off out of harm's way here on the right side of the queen excluder. Nurse bees. Not a lot of them on that frame, but just enough. Put these guys back together. Let's turn on this side. All right. This is the second breeder. Go to the next breeder. Working on down the line here. This grain bag isn't propolized, it comes right off. That's a frame of honey. This queen is marked. Always amazed at the things one can remember. Especially when it comes to beekeeping, it's like my memory is fully engaged. In other parts of my life, I can't remember a thing. I can't remember a name to save my life, especially if I don't know somebody very well. But a face I'll never forget. Names are hard. So let's see, there she is. Let's just take a look at this. Which frame's got the goods here. Boy, there's a nice little nectar flow. The honeysuckle's just starting to pop, and any cells that are empty in the brood nest right now are kind of getting filled up with today's nectar. There's a few larvae in there, but I like the looks of the frame here better, so we'll use this one. And we'll transfer the queen. Blue's a nice color because it's like just, I think if I'm not mistaken, blue is a very hard color to be found in nature. It's just very hard for, it's just not a natural color in a sense. I mean, outside of the sky, but you start looking around at what plants are blue, what birds are blue. Blue is really a rare anomaly in nature. Let's see. And we'll brush, brush, brush. For a nice demonstration. Bee brushes are nice when used, when they're needed. Like in this type of stuff where you got just a small, you shook off most of the bees and you got the young nurse bees that stick to like the frames like Velcro, just to get them off so you don't have this mess of bees flying around in the shop you're trying to graft or in the space you're trying to graft. So there it is. Oh, one thing I want to show you guys while we're here is the cell builders. Just mark with this frame accordingly here. No, that's not R, that's a 76. Let's see which one is which here. Oh yeah, here's a good sign. Not the most intense amount, but see this, if you just, zoomed around, this is when the bees are out on the face of the colony, they're not doing this on any other colonies except for the ones we set up for cell builders. This is what you want to see, this is the behavior you want to see for colonies that are really desperate for queen rearing or to raise cells. Again, they know they have no queen. Only takes them, I think, a short amount of time to realize they're queenless, and once they get to this state and they have no resources to start raising queens, they just go into a frenzy. So the second you start, when you drop you drop your graft in this, literally after about a few minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you come back and everything is kind of in order. The bees kind of calm down. It's amazing to see, how they just get all worked up into this frenzy without any ability to raise queens, or even without a queen present in the hive. All right, so we'll go back up and we'll graft. Come on. All right, so grafting, I'm not going to get you guys, there's plenty of footage out there for grafting. I'm not going to take up too much of your time showing you what I do. Essentially, I usually don't use this headlamp. I usually use a light, just a cheapo LED little light like this. It's got like some AAA batteries or something. Sufficiently, that's what works for me, and I've been doing it this way for so long, it's just what I'm comfortable with. A lot of grafting is just all about there's a technique to it, but a lot of it is finding a way that you're comfortable with, visually, seeing what you need to see, and then if you're going to use one of these Chinese grafting tools, they're so cheap. What I would do is buy 20 of these and go through and find the one that actually has the right amount of bend. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of time to get the right amount of flexibility on well, it used to be a piece of bamboo, but it's just a piece of plastic or something now. So this particular tool is probably, I think, 5 years old. I've been using it for a while. It's held up pretty good. One thing that I do that helps keep these longevity, just preserve them, is to dip them when I'm done. I just dip this in a vat, a little thing of isopropyl alcohol, and that kind of keeps it clean and it keeps it from getting all gummed up. And if they work, then I try to hold on to them for as long as I can use them. So what else do I need to share with you guys? I typically, if I had to, this light works great, but typically what I like to do is focus on a small area of the comb, and we're hunting a little bit because the brood is of multiple ages here, but for the sake of a demonstration, what I can show you is like a larvae that's a little bit bigger than what I'd like, but it's acceptable. I don't know if you guys can zoom in on that. That's kind of like within the medium range of age and size of larvae, and you can see it's already got a little pool of jelly, there's usually more than that in an ideal scenario, but for the sake of showing you guys, there's just enough jelly that it's floating in, and then so you want to make sure you keep it the right side up, that it was in the cell, and then place it in the cup right down at the bottom, which I didn't see. See, that's the thing, it stuck to the, this is the first graft of the year, guys. First larvae transfer of the year, so even people who've done this for a while make mistakes. Let's try it again. So we got larvae transferred in the cell. Again, it's going to be really hard to see. I don't know if you guys can see. It's just like a little wet spot at the bottom of the cell. I can see the larvae from my vantage point, but I don't know if you can get it on the camera. Anyway, so that's that. Okay, so we are going to put the grafts in to the colonies since we're all done grafting, and the bees are ready. So we got 240 grafts, and in 5 days I'll come back and check them. I like to come back in 5 days once the cells are capped, because then you really got a good take on what they're doing. You come back tomorrow and a lot can happen between now and the actual day that they cap the cells. So, and it's just convenient. I don't have time to come back tomorrow. I got a bunch of other stuff I need to do, so we'll just come back in 5 days. The cells will be capped. We'll reunite the queen into the colony below a queen excluder. So essentially then at that point it's kind of like a finishing colony with the cells above the excluder. And after 10 days from today, you have 14-day-old queen cells, so they're pretty much ripe cells at that point. And that's when I transfer the cells to the mating yards and have the queens emerge in the mating nukes. Or you can, I guess, use the cells in all sorts of different endeavors. If you got an incubator, they could go to the incubator at any point in time once the cells are capped. So pretty much if you had an incubator, you could put them in the incubator in 5 days from today, or 5 days from today, I should say. And you could incubate them and hatch them in the incubator. I'll just keep them in the beehives. If you do have, the bees will sometimes tear down the queen cells. If you leave them in for the full duration in the finisher colony or above the excluder in my case, leave them on the bees, in a sense, they sometimes do tear down cells. I know if you got a little bit of an EFB kind of outbreak going on, the bees will clean up the larvae that are subjected to that infection. So you do have some cells that get torn down because of that. And I don't use antibiotics on my bees, so I'm not really in a hurry to use antibiotics. But regardless, my point being is that if I see EFB, I just don't use it for cell building. And for the most part, there was a couple years ago, or more than a few years ago, there was a point, well, it's kind of in time, where I saw EFB pretty regularly. It's kind of disturbing, actually. For about 3 or 4 seasons, there was this constant EFB outbreak happening in my apiary in the springtime. And obviously, I think it attributed to a lot of stress, the change of the season. If you had cold days where the bees couldn't get out and forage, just added stress. Anyways, EFB kind of sets in, and you can have an outbreak. But I haven't seen EFB like I used to. I actually started to see it pop up a little bit a few weeks ago, and a lot of the bees, really surprisingly, cleaned it right up. Like the start of the dandelion flow, you no longer saw these little sick, twisted yellow larvae in the bottom of the cells. They all cleaned it up, and the queen came back and relayed, and you had these beautiful white larvae looking at you. I don't know what I did with oh, there they are. My fancy shims. Top high feeder. I was thinking about using top high feeders for this, but I kind of like having the can right above the cluster, especially if we get a couple of cold, rainy days ahead of us. The top high feeders are kind of hard for the bees to justify to leave cluster to access, so I like to have the cans right up above the clusters. Let's see, where's the other two cell builders? Right here. That's a nice way to do it. Take the whole lid right off. Try to be quick about getting these grafts in. I do cover them with a wet paper towel when I'm grafting. I don't know, Fred, how long did it take us to graft? An hour?
Yeah.
So an hour to graft 240 cells. It really comes down to, for me, if you got all the larvae looking at you when you're grafting, you can get it. Once you kind of develop your skill set for grafting, it's just a matter of transferring the larvae and making it easier to do that. Oops, sorry girls, didn't mean to squish you. That's one of the downfalls of, I should have paid attention to the lid there. Anyways, lots going on. Where's the last one? Over here. The first graft of the season for me, it's always kind of a little fun, and weather cooperating, it can be a little nerve-wracking if the weather's not all that great. But again, about the schedule that I mentioned, having bad inclement weather, you can still get the job's got to get done. And in my position where I have to maintain to a schedule, because I only get this small window of time throughout the season to graft, you got to seize the day. What's the Latin? Carpe diem? Seize the day. There, we'll come back in 5 days and we'll have some nice, pretty queen cells that are full of jelly. That's the trick, right? Lots of jelly. Abundance of royal jelly. A little bit of syrup to aid the cause. If they don't take the syrup, then so be it. At least we did everything we could do. On a nice flow, they'll turn their nose up at the syrup, but again, tomorrow is going to be pretty wet, so it'll be a little bit of an insurance for me to just kind of have the syrup on them. Anyways, queen cells in, first graft of the season done. On to more bee adventures.